Why are you taking so long? Communication. You're totally honest with me. Come on. Hi, grande coffee, please. All of our communication is one-sided, obviously. There you go. Anyway, we need to talk. Come on. Okay?
Well, it's great to have you here with us across all of our campuses. And before I jump into Crucial Conversations, just want to tell you about something new that we're doing around LCBC that you may or may not have interest in, or maybe you know somebody that would. But it's actually a new leadership program that we are starting for young and emerging leaders around LCBC, and it's called Develop. And two things that I'll just mention to you real briefly today. One is, for those of you that may happen to be college graduates, recent college graduates, and you're trying to figure out how can I enhance my abilities as a leader, maybe even in the church? Could church be a career for me sometime in the future? Then part of the Develop is a leadership training program. It's actually a 2-year program, and it's a paid position. And if you are interested in finding out more about it, begins this August, 4 to 6 people that will be taking into this program in August. And so you can go to the church website, lcbcchurch.com, and just look under the Develop tab and get more information about the leadership training program for college grads. There's a second part of that is actually for anybody that's a high school grad and maybe a recent high school grad, but interested in music and has abilities and skills in music. And maybe you're thinking, is possibly a career for you in worship leading. And so this is an 18-month residency program, and love to have you check that out. Same thing starts this summer. You can go to the website, lcbcchurch.com, and go to Develop and find out more information about the worship leader residency program. But love to have you check that out for yourself, maybe for a friend, maybe a son, a daughter, brother, sister, whatever it may be. Tell them about it and have them check that out. Well, we're in this series that we've entitled Crucial Conversations. And in this series, what we're actually doing is talking about the fact that in our relationships, and this is really a relationship series, in our relationships, we all find times where situations where we find ourselves in critical moments, crucial conversations, and depending on how that conversation goes, it's either going to drive the relationship forward or it's going to knock it back a step or two or more. And all of us find ourselves in these situations. And in these conversations, we have a decision to make. Are we going to be honest? Are we going to go ahead and share our feelings, our thoughts, our perceptions to the moment? Or are we going to sweep it under the rug and pretend that we don't have any feelings at all? And what's interesting is we tend to sweep it under the rug. We tend to think, I'll just keep the peace, don't want to rock the boat. But what happens is in our efforts to keep the peace, we actually are killing the very relationship that we're trying to save. And so we've been challenging ourselves to say, okay, let's have these crucial conversations in order to enhance and strengthen our relationships. And so we've been looking at what God has to say about how to deal with life and specifically relationships in these crucial conversations. And 3 ingredients that are in every crucial conversation, because not every conversation is a crucial conversation. And so we've been looking at saying there are 3 ingredients that are present in crucial conversations. One would be the fact that opinions vary. Different ways to look at the same situation, so there's varied opinions. The stakes are high. There's a reason for there to be intensity in this conversation. And third, emotions are strong. A lot of feelings going on. And when these 3 ingredients are at work, then these are things that make the conversation crucial. It's different than other conversations. Now, oftentimes, we know that there's a conversation we need to have. We know there's a topic we need to address, something that we need to talk about. And so we go ahead and we set up and we schedule a time to have a crucial conversation. Maybe it's at home, maybe it's in a relationship, maybe it's at business, maybe it's at school. And so we go ahead and we set and we plan to have this crucial conversation. And yet oftentimes, maybe more often than not, these crucial conversations kind of hit us out of the blue. Not expecting them, they kind of creep up on us and we weren't aware of it, weren't prepared for it. And that's when we tend not to handle our crucial conversations well. For instance, Back when Ruth and I were in our late 20s, so not that long ago, and Justin, our son, was about 2 or 3 years old at the time, we decided to take a family vacation to Disney World. And as we talked about the vacation, it was going to be this wonderful, magical, enchanted time as we walked the grounds and rode the rides at the Magic Kingdom, as we explored the different countries of Epcot, and it was wonderful, maybe even enchanting, until Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock. And at 2 o'clock, everything began to change. As we were walking through Magic Kingdom at 2 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon in the middle of Magic Kingdom, out of nowhere, we encountered a crucial conversation. I mean, it just came out of nowhere, just kind of hit us. And I'll tell you the gist of that crucial conversation. As I tell you, I'm almost embarrassed to tell you about the conversation, because this conversation not only ruined that enchanted day, almost ruined the entire vacation, could have had lingering effects down the road in our relationship. And had it not been for Ruth being so loving and gracious and forgiving, might have had a very different outcome. Now, back then, and I don't even know if they still do it today. Back then, Disney World would always have every afternoon at 2:30 a parade. And this parade would start at the castle, and it would make its way down Main Street. And in the parade, there would be floats, and there would be bands, and there would be Disney characters. And it was kind of this wonderful little parade that headed down Main Street. And so Ruth really wanted to see the parade. I did not. I wasn't interested in the parade. And it was crowded that day at Disney, as it seems to almost always be. And so in order to see the parade, Ruth suggested at 2 o'clock that we go ahead and sit down on the curb. Let's pick a spot on the curb so we can see the parade as it comes down the road, so our view will not be inhibited. And Ruth stands about 5 feet 2 inches tall. And so she said, when people get in front of me, I can't see around them. I want to see the parade. Plus, Justin is here in the stroller and want him to be able to see the parade. And so let's go ahead, pick a spot on the curb, sit down now, and just wait for the parade to come, and it'll be relaxing, and it all sounds reasonable, right? Well, for me, it's 2 o'clock. Parade doesn't start until 2:30, and so that's another 30 minutes away. So I'm thinking, if we do this right, if we hurry, we can actually go ride the flying saucers one more time, or we can drive the little cars that kind of are on the tracks and have the lawnmower engines, and we can drive the old-time cars around, and we can squeeze in a ride, get back before the parade actually starts. Besides, I'm not all that interested in the parade, and let's think about this. We paid $55 back then to get into this park. $55 a person. Do we really want to spend it sitting on the curb for 30 minutes waiting for the parade? And that's where the crucial conversation started. Opinions varied. The stakes were high. Are we going to see the parade or are we not? Are we going to get the value for our $55 tickets or not? And emotions were definitely strong. So 2 o'clock, Sunday afternoon, Disney World, we had a crucial conversation. Now, there's a man named Joseph Grenny, and he actually wrote a book entitled Crucial Conversations, and we're using some of his material in this series. And he actually studied crucial conversations, relationships, for 30 years. And what he actually found is that when we have crucial conversations, and all of us do, all of us find ourselves at times in crucial conversations, and he said when the opinions and stakes are high and when the emotions get strong, he said we all tend to go to one of two places. One of the places he says we go to is silence. The other place he actually describes as violence. And he says all of us go to one of those two places, and both responses are unhealthy. Neither one is a good place to go. One actually withholds information, the other tries to force it. One holds back in the conversation, the other tries to force the conversation. And silence consists of any form of withholding from that situation. And violence is kind of any kind of action that tries to say, okay, we're going to have this conversation whether we want to have it or not. I mean, three most common forms of silence are masking, avoiding, and withdrawal. Masking is not fully being quiet. It's not just shutting down. Masking is actually sugarcoating the situation, not being truthful about it. Or masking is becoming sarcastic in the situation. And so we'll say things like, oh, that's a brilliant idea. And we'll kind of sarcastically talk about, oh, that's going to work like a charm. Where do you come up with these ideas? And we're masking, we're kind of withdrawing from the situation, but we're being smart as we do it, or sarcastic as we do it. Avoiding is just kind of sidestepping the conversation. And so never truthfully dealing with the situation. Oh, yeah, what do I think of your new suit? Well, blue's one of my favorite colors. And so we address it, but we don't. We avoid actually the real situation. Withdrawal is backing away completely. And kind of said, I don't really want anything. I'd rather gnaw off my own arm than to have the conversation you want to have right now. Don't want to be a part of any of this. And so those are probably the three most common forms of silence. When it comes to violence, three most common forms of violence are actually controlling, labeling, and attacking. And when we try to control the outcome so that somehow you're going to come around to my way of thinking in this. And so controlling, we overstate the facts. And when we control, cut you off in mid-sentence because I want to make my point. I want you to hear what I have to say. Or we'll speak in absolutes. And we'll say things like, there isn't a person on earth that thinks like that. Nobody in their right mind would actually think that way. And the last time we tried this, it was an absolute disaster. Everybody knows that won't work. And what we're doing is we're trying to control the situation. Or labeling is when we actually start using terms. We stereotype people in the situation. We call names and we say, your ideas are practically Neanderthal, meaning nobody in their right mind would think that way anymore. And it's kind of putting people into stereotypes and labels because it's easier to attack a stereotype and a label than it is to attack a person head on. And so we label or just attacking outright is where the conversation changes. No longer is it about just trying to win my side of the argument, but now it's about saying, you know what, I'm gonna make you suffer for thinking differently than me. And so we move from constructive comments to threats or belittling, and we say, try that stupid stunt again and we'll see what happens next. And we begin to make threats and we attack, or we'll say things that are real hurtful, and then we'll kind of back up and say, well, somebody had to speak the truth. Somebody had to have the nerve to go ahead and talk about this openly. And now what's interesting, Joseph Grenny says all of us go to one or the other place. It just happens. And I don't know if you've ever stopped to think about what's your style. Where do you tend to do in the midst of an emotional conversation? But it would probably be wise for all of us to figure out, do I tend to go to silence? Do I tend to go to violence? Now, I thought I knew which way I went as I began to study this, but then realized I've got some of both inside of me. And so I don't ever go to withdrawal and complete silence. I go to sarcasm. And it's easy for me to get sarcastic. Or I'll go to the violence side from the standpoint of just trying to force the conversation, say, you know what, we're going to have this conversation. And keep prodding and prodding until we have it. Neither are good. Neither lead us to a good place in the conversation. And so let's talk about how do we begin to change our emotions in the midst of a crucial conversation? How do we deal with it differently so that we're not always running to silence or violence? Because how we deal with our emotions impacts our crucial conversations. Let me tell you how it typically works. Something happens in our lives, typically with another person, in our relationship with another person. Something happens, the words are spoken, an action is taken that really kind of sets us off, which results in a particular action, and we either act in silence or violence. So something happens, we act or react in silence or violence, and that's kind of the cycle, and yet that's an incomplete look at the cycle because there's one other step that's in the midst of this, in the middle. Between when something happens and between the time of silence or violence, we actually, in between what happens and our reaction, is we tell ourselves a story. And we tell ourselves a story about what just happened, and based on the story we tell, it either justifies our actions or it gives us a reason for why we're acting the way that we're acting. And so we tell ourselves a story, and it happens instantaneously. And you may say, I don't tell myself a story. You do, we all do. Happens instantaneously. We don't think about it. We're not conscious of it, it just happens. And when we tell ourselves a story, what we're doing is we're kind of rehearsing the facts of what just happened. It's our interpretation of it. It's what we saw and heard based on our point of view. And so we tell ourselves a story which is going to lead to our actions and maybe justifies our actions. And if you say, I don't think this really happens, well, that's why 10 people can see the same exact situation, but they all react differently. And you say, why is it that everybody can react differently? Well, because they've all told different stories in their minds about what just happened. And people that are good at crucial conversations understand the fact that they tell stories in their heads and they begin to master the stories that are going on in their heads. Now you say, I don't know that I really buy this, David. I'm not sure that I tell myself a story. Again, it happens blindingly fast. We don't think about it. We're not even conscious. We're not even aware of it, but it happens and you don't even realize it. And you're telling yourself a story. Maybe it happens like this, where we're two people, same situation, totally different kind of outcome to the story. Watch this.
So I have this picture frame at work it's actually 3 picture frames. They're double-sided, so there's 6 pictures, but only 3 show at one time. So I decided to flip them over, and I realized, I have an old picture in here, and it's actually of an old college friend in me.
His ex-girlfriend.
But we were friends throughout college. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is, I need to get rid of this picture because I'm
Married now. Why would he still have a photo of him and
another woman on my desk at work. So I took the picture and put it in a folder, which I carry things home from work. And I was planning on chucking it in an old box of college photos, but later that night, my wife asked me about something, and I told her, hey, yeah, go check in my
folder? And what do I see staring back at me but a photo of him and her? What was I supposed to say? What was I supposed to do? I didn't say a word, so I left the folder lying
open with a picture on top. She didn't say a word. She went right to bed, and I knew I was in deep.
She shouldn't be on his mind. I was upset. I should be the
only woman that I care about. So why does it matter that I have an old picture
of the two of them? Why would he keep it? Why wouldn't he throw it away?
Doesn't she trust me enough?
Doesn't he know how this makes me feel?
We've all been there. Same situation, something actually happens. We act in either silence or violence because of the story that we tell in our minds. And people that are good at crucial conversations understand that they've got to learn to master the stories that we tell. Now, the stories that we tell tend to be their themes that repeat themselves over and over. And so it's kind of, you begin to identify, okay, this is the kind of story I'm telling. And so one of the stories we tend to tell is that of the victim, where we kind of think it's not my fault that I'm in this situation. And when we're playing the victim, we're thinking, you know what? They're the ones that are causing the problem. I'm just the innocent bystander here. And in the victim stories, it's always the same. The other person is wrong. The other person is bad. The other person is stupid. I'm the right one. I'm the good one. I'm the brilliant one in this kind of situation. And other people are always wrong, and I'm the one suffering the consequences. It's not my fault. Or there's the villain stories. In the villain stories, we kind of look at the other person and we say, you're the bonehead here. You're the one that's messing up again and again. And so we look at the villains and we exaggerate our part in the whole situation. And we exaggerate our emphasis and our innocence. And then we overemphasize their guilt or their dumb move. And in villain stories, we tend to call each other names. And you're a bonehead because it's easier to insult a bonehead than it is to look at you in the eye and insult you. And so victim stories, villain stories. There's also kind of the helpless stories. What do you expect me to do? How else could I have responded to this particular situation? In these stories, we make ourselves out to be powerless. And we kind of say, there's nothing else that I could possibly do in this situation. What do you expect of me? What else could I have possibly done? And we convince ourselves with these stories that the way that we're acting is justified. What else could I possibly have done? Now, let me show you an example from the Bible of how this works. So let me ask you to grab a Bible. There should be some in the seats around you on all of our campuses. I'll tell you the page number is page 223, 1 Samuel chapter 16. 1 Samuel chapter 16. I want to show you an example of how this kind of works and tell you about the life of a man named Saul. Saul was actually the king of the nation of Israel. He's a big man. He's a powerful man. Had some smarts, had some wisdom, had some abilities, and so he's a good man. And Saul is the king, and he's struggling to sleep. He's just feeling real anxious, and he's not able to sleep. And so some of his advisors come to him and say, you know what we think would help you is if there was some soothing music that you would listen to. It might just kind of calm your nerves and help you to sleep a little bit. And so Saul says, okay, find me somebody that can play some soothing music. That'll be great for me. 1 Samuel chapter 16, let me begin reading verse 17. All right, Saul said, find me someone who plays well and bring him here. One of the servants said to Saul, one of Jesse's sons from Bethlehem is a talented harp player. Not only that, he is a brave warrior, a man of war, and has good judgment. He's also a fine-looking young man, and the Lord is with him. So Saul says, sure, I'll take somebody that can kind of help me. I'll do anything at this point to kind of relieve the tension that I'm feeling. And so they say, here's a guy, his name is David. Go down to verse 21. David went to Saul, began serving him. Saul loved David very much, and David became his armor bearer. Then Saul sent word to Jesse, asking, please let David, your son, remain in my service, for I am very pleased with him. Saul says, he's helping me out a bunch. And there's actually this story going on in Saul's mind where Saul says, okay, here's this guy named David. He's a warrior, he's a tough guy, but he's also helping me with my anxiety, my tensions, and so I like him. He's a good guy. And they grow in their friendship and their relationship, and the story is all very, very positive. Go over to chapter 18, verse 5, just a couple pages over. Verse 5, chapter 18 says, whatever Saul asked David to do, David did it successfully. So Saul made him a commander over the men of war, an appointment that was welcomed by the people and Saul's officers alike. The story that Saul is telling about David in his mind is this is a good guy, he's a sharp guy, he's a trusted guy. He's an ally of mine, I can trust him. He puts him in charge of all of the armies. Everybody thinks it's a great situation. Everybody's feeling good about this. And the story goes on, Verse 6, when the victorious Israelite army was returning home after David had killed the Philistine, women from all the town of Israel came out to meet King Saul. So it's all good. Everybody's coming out, they're cheering for Saul, they're excited about what's going on. They sang and danced for joy with tambourines and cymbals. This was their song, and this is what changed the story all of a sudden in Saul's head. Saul has killed his thousands, and David his 10,000s. This made Saul very angry. What's this, he said. They credit David with 10,000s and me with only thousands. Next, they'll be making him their king. So from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. All of a sudden, the story changes in Saul's head. Now, what's fascinating is you kind of say, what's different about this? What did David do differently? He didn't do anything differently. He's still a gifted, talented harp player, still plays music. He's still a talented warrior. He always was. He's still a trusted, confident friend, and he's a man of war. None of that changes, but what changed is the story that Saul is telling himself. Something happened that changed the story in Saul's mind. What happened is David's getting more attention than he's getting, and all of a sudden the story changes, and all of a sudden in his mind, everything is different. He feels threatened. He's jealous about what's going on. In his mind, things have changed drastically. So look at verse 17. One day, Saul said to David, I'm ready to give you my older daughter, Merab, as your wife, but first you must prove yourself to be a real warrior by fighting the Lord's battles. For Saul thought, I'll send him out against the Philistines, let them kill him rather than doing it myself. It's gone so far. But Saul is at the point, because of the story that he's telling in his mind, he's thinking, I need to take this guy out. Can't trust him anymore. He's trying to take my throne. I just need to kill him. And the story about David gets darker and darker in Saul's mind, where it just takes control of his emotions and his actions. And because of the story that Saul is telling himself about David, he's obsessed with the idea of killing David, even to the detriment of his own family. He even puts his own family in danger. And so what Saul does is he invites David to a special dinner. Invites him to a dinner where he plans to do something to take David's life. And David stays away. He knows that Saul's emotions have gotten the best of him. And so go to chapter 20, verse 27. A couple pages over, chapter 20, verse 27. David's been invited to the meal, verse 27, but when David's place was empty again the next day, Saul asked Jonathan. Jonathan is actually Saul's son. Also happens to be David's best friend. So when Saul asked Jonathan, why hasn't the son of Jesse, who's David, been here for the meal either yesterday or today? Jonathan, again Saul's son, replied, David earnestly asked me if he could go to the Bethlehem. He said, please let me go, for we are having a family sacrifice. My brother demanded that I be there, so please let me get away to see my brothers. That's why he isn't here at the king's table. Saul boiled with rage at Jonathan. You stupid son of a whore, he swore at him. Do you think I don't know that you want him to be king in your place, shaming yourself and your mother? As long as that son of Jesse is alive, you'll never be king. Now go and get him so I can kill him. And Saul's out of control, and he is enraged. But why should he be put to death? Jonathan asked his father. What has he done? Then Saul hurled his spear at Jonathan, intending to kill him. So at last, Jonathan realized that his father was really determined to kill David. And the story changed. Nothing really so much changed about David. His actions weren't any different, but somehow the story changes. And Saul in his mind begins to develop this story and build this story of what a threat David is. And Saul is telling himself, I've got to get rid of him. And Saul is out of control, all because of the story that he's telling himself in his head. Now, I don't know what it's like to have such a twisted story in your head that you'd actually think about killing one of your own family members, that you'd actually think about killing your own son. But I do know what it's like to get a twisted story in your head to the point where you begin to do some stupid things. So it's 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon at Disney World. And I have a choice. I can be rational and I can tell myself a very rational story about what's happening, or I actually can begin to build a very irrational story, and I can build a whopper of a story and do something stupid. And so I chose the whopper of a story and chose to go ahead and do something stupid. And I don't remember exactly the details of the story, but I remember very well the actions that followed that particular story. What I know is that there in the middle of Magic Kingdom, heated words were exchanged. And what I know is I kind of came to the conclusion where I said something to the effect that, fine, if you want to sit and wait for the parade for 30 minutes, do that. But I'm not going to do that. I'm out of here. So I left Ruth and Justin there waiting for the parade. But you kind of step back and say, so what does a real mad 20-something-year-old guy do at Disney World? And there wasn't a whole lot for me to do, so I actually left the park. I said, you know what, I'm out of here. So I walk all the way to the gate, 20, 30 minutes to get to the front gate. I get on the tram, I go to the parking lot, I drive 30 minutes to the hotel in downtown Orlando. Park the car, go up to the room, buy a newspaper, it's Sunday, buy a Sunday paper, lay on the bed, watch golf, read the paper, and I'm thinking, I'm really showing her. You know, I'm the one who's the boss here. And so I'm laying on the bed, and I don't know what changed my thinking, what actually began to happen, but at some point, the story in my head began to change. And at some point, I realized this isn't about winning the argument anymore. At some point, it became one of fear, and I began to think, what in the world did I just do? And how in the world am I gonna find them? I mean, it's hours later in the day, and I get up off the bed, and I go down to get the car, and I drive back to Disney, and I park, and I take the tram, and I go back to the park. And what you need to realize, this is before cell phones, so there was no way to communicate with one another. And so somewhere in Disney World are Ruth and Justin, and odds are I was carrying all the money because she had Justin and probably no food, no way to contact us, and no idea of where I had gone. So hours and hours later, it's evening now, and amazingly, we found each other. And I don't know exactly how, but we find each other, and there in the middle of the Magic Kingdom, we all embrace and we cried and we sobbed, and I begged for forgiveness, and all because I had allowed the story in my head to just kind of grow and develop and take me someplace to do something stupid. And when we don't manage the stories in our head, that's when we begin to do stupid things. That's when we fail at crucial conversations. If we're gonna do well at crucial conversations, we've gotta learn to manage our emotions by managing the stories that we tell ourselves in our heads, and mastering my emotions by mastering the stories that I tell myself. Now, let me give you some tips on how to master the story. And one of the biggest tips that I can give you is don't omit facts. What we tend to do in our stories that we tell ourselves is we leave out some of the important facts. And so our stories look different from the other person's point of view because we're leaving out facts about what's really going on. Facts like, I'm 6'4", she's 5'2", and so I can see over people. It's not a big deal if people are in front of me, but she can't. The fact that Justin's in a stroller, he can't see the parade. Facts like, yes, we have 30 minutes till the parade comes, and yes, we could ride the flying saucers in about 5 minutes' time, but it's a 45-minute wait to get on the ride to the flying saucer. So no, we really couldn't ride any other rides, and that's what we do with our stories. We begin to leave out facts that are important to the situation. And as we leave out the facts and we build our stories, we do stupid things. And we damage relationships. And without the facts, we do boneheaded kind of things. Now, I'm way out of my 20s now. And I would like to think that I don't do boneheaded things like I used to. And when I do, though, most often it's because I'm still omitting facts. It's because I still don't have all the information, because I leave out certain facts. For instance, I was on my way to the office this Wednesday. And I'm driving to the office, and I head into town, and I come up to a stoplight, and I'm about 4 or 5 cars back from the stoplight. And so all I know is the light is red. There's cars in front of me. And so I'm watching for the light to turn green. It finally turns green. And as I'm watching, the cars don't begin to move. And because I'm a patient and just kind of a very calm kind of person, I wait. But I also notice that, okay, the light's been green for a while. We're not moving at all. And so I began to tell a story in my head. And my story is that there's foolish people in front of me. They're boneheads. They don't know that the light is green. The story I'm telling myself is somebody surely is on their phone and they're talking or they're texting. They don't know that the light is green. And the story I'm telling myself is if nobody else has the nerve to say, you know what, the light is green, then I do. And I'm willing to say the light is green. And so I decide right there on the intersection to have a little mini crucial conversation with the people in front of me. And I decide the way I'll have that crucial conversation is with my horn. And I'll just point out the fact that the light is now green. And again, the story in my mind, all this made perfect sense. And so I just kind of lay on the horn a couple of times. Just, again, a crucial conversation to say the light's green. If you hadn't noticed, you can go ahead and move forward. And so I honk the horn a couple of times, and then slowly, not right away, slowly the traffic begins to move, and I'm worried I'm not gonna get through the light because it's important that I make it through the light, and so I'm kind of pushing to get up there. And once I get up to the intersection, all of a sudden I begin to realize, okay, maybe this is why they weren't moving. And apparently what had happened is a guy had been going down the sidewalk on his wheelchair, and he fell off the sidewalk, out of his wheelchair, into the road, and so the people in front of me were getting out, helping him get back in his chair up on the sidewalk. And there's Pastor David 4 or 5 cars back, honking his horn. And all because I didn't have all the facts. So I would just tell you, to master the stories in our head, stop omitting the facts and realize we may not have all the information. Turn villains into humans. It's easy for us to vilify the other person and think they're wrong, they're evil, they're doing these things just to harm and hurt me. Stop villainizing them, turn them into humans. Admit that I'm not helpless in the situation. I have a part in all of this as well. There are other ways that I can respond. Now, let me give you 4 quick questions to ask. When you find yourself and your emotions are kind of getting the best of you, 4 quick questions to ask yourself. One is, what am I pretending not to notice about my role in this? In other words, I've got a part in this. And so what am I not noticing? What am I not admitting? I'm at fault here somewhere too. And almost never is it just all one-sided. There's always 2 sides to it. And so where am I at fault? Why would a decent person do what they're doing? Why would the 4 or 5 cars in front of me sitting there through this light? I mean, they're not totally boneheads. They're not always fools. Why would they do what they're doing? Why would Ruth, who's a very decent person, why would she choose and want me to choose to sit and watch a parade? So think through. She's not foolish. She's a decent person. What do I really want in this situation? What am I really after in this situation? For me, what I wanted at Disney World is this wonderful family time together, a bonding time where we just enjoy each other. And so if that's the case, then what would I do right now if that's really what I wanted? How would I behave right now? And behaving right now surely isn't driving away and going back to the hotel and leaving them by themselves. And so you begin to ask these questions. You begin to change the story going on in your head. And all of a sudden, you begin to realize, ooh, maybe not a good decision. And you begin to do better, make better decisions in the midst of your crucial conversations. Now, what I'm telling you is all really good advice. It works, straight from the Bible. And if we would all choose to follow this, we would be better for it. But I also need to tell you one other piece of information. And the other piece of information that I need to give you is if we decide to take all of this information home and apply it to our lives, we're still gonna fail. We're gonna mess up because we can't do it alone. We can't. This is something that comes from our hearts, and our hearts don't always tell good stories. Our hearts kind of get messed up and they don't tell good stories, and so we're still gonna struggle changing the stories that we tell ourselves in our mind. That's why God says, look, I'll give you a new heart. God says, you can't do this alone. You've got an old heart that needs to be changed. I'll give you a new one. That's why God actually says this. He says, I'll give you a new heart. I'll put a new spirit in you. I will take out your stony, stubborn heart. I'll give you a tender, responsive heart. God says, you can try all this, and you'll make some good decisions, but you're going to mess up because it's all about your heart. And you've got this stony, hard, stubborn heart. Got to change the heart. But the cool thing is God says, along with the new heart, he says, I'll give you my spirit. My spirit comes with my heart. And what's great about that is when we get this new heart, God's Spirit is inside of us. And when God's Spirit is inside of us, this is what happens. But the Holy Spirit, God's Spirit, produces this kind of fruit in our lives: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. He says that's the kind of heart that you're going to have. And when you have that kind of heart, you're going to generate stories that are very different than your cold, stony, hard, stubborn heart generates. And so God says, you want to change the stories in your mind? You want to change your life? You want to change your relationships? You want to change your family? He says, change your heart. Because with my heart, with my new heart, he says, I'm going to give you my Spirit. With my Spirit, you're going to have patience and gentleness and kindness that you didn't have before. God says, along with that, that's what's going to change you. He says, my Spirit in you will bring about changes in your life. It'll change your stories. He says it'll change your heart. And today, God says, look, I want you to do well at your crucial conversations. You can't do it well alone. He says, I'm offering to give you a new heart, and I'm offering with that new heart my Spirit, which is going to allow you to change your stories, and which will change, again, how you respond to crucial conversations. It'll change your relationships. It will change your life. And so today, ask God for a new heart. Today, say, God, I just want a new heart. And then as you get that new heart, ask and allow God's Spirit to change your stories. And when you mess up, and you will mess up again, we all will. I do, obviously, I do. And so we ask God and we say, God, I'm sorry, I messed up. And so in the future, God, I'm asking your Spirit to guide me. Cool thing is, too, God gives new hearts to the person that we're hurting sometimes and allows them to respond graciously and lovingly. And God says, you know what? There will be a next time. You will face crucial conversations. He says, I'll give you a new heart. I'll give you my Spirit to guide you. Heavenly Father, God, all of us find ourselves in situations where the stories we tell in our mind are incomplete. The stories that we tell in our mind are that we're justified to act in silence or violence. The stories that we tell in our mind are actually not going to be healthy stories. They're going to lead to something damaging, and they're going to hurt our relationships with our husbands or our wives or our children or our coworkers or our classmates. And you're offering us a new heart. God, today give us the courage, the boldness, the humility to accept a new heart. And God, as we accept this new heart that you give us through Jesus, Heavenly Father, I ask that your Spirit would work in our lives, that we would become people that are tender-hearted, that we would become people that are gentle and kind and patient and have self-control, that the stories that generate out of our hearts, that they be stories generated out of that love and patience and joy and peace. And may our stories be different because our stories are different. May our lives be different. Father, when we mess up, thank you for forgiving us. Thank you for forgiving us and giving us second and third and fourth and fifth chances. God, thanks for loving us. Thank you for telling us how to do life and how to do it well. And I pray in Jesus' name, amen.